There are names history preserves because they are honored. There are names it preserves because they are feared. And then there are names that history has deliberately tried to erase. Shoshan is one such name. You may search the great temples of Agomar and find little mention of her. You may consult the approved histories of the Pantheon and discover only scattered fragments, warnings, or accusations. Some priests will tell you that she was always an enemy of the gods, and others may insist that she never stood among them at all. But they are wrong. Before Theosel became the goddess of death and repurpose, before mortals understood that the end of life could possess meaning, Shoshan stood beside Agomar as one of the earliest members of the Pantheon. She was not created as a creature of cruelty, nor was she the mistress of murder or suffering. Shoshan was balance. Where Agomar brought life into the world, Shoshan moved that life toward its natural conclusion. Where he opened the first breath, she stood beside the final one. She was entrusted with destruction and death, but neither was malicious beneath her care. A forest cannot grow forever without decay. A season cannot continue without end, and a life that never concludes cannot make room for another. Shoshan understood this. Her purpose was not to hunt the living or shorten the lives they had been given. She was charged with guiding them toward the end appointed to them. She walked beside those whose years had faded, whose wounds could no longer be healed, those whose final moments had come. She brought endings where endings were necessary, and she shepherded the souls of the dead away from the world that they had known. For a time, the gods believed the balance complete. Life began, life continued, and life ended. Yet there was a flaw in that order, and Shoshan encountered it each time she gathered another soul. The dead were confused. They asked her where she was taking them, and she could not always answer. They asked what purpose their lives had served. They asked whether their struggles had mattered, whether their sacrifices had been seen, and whether anyone would remember that they had lived at all. Many had spent their years working, enduring, loving, grieving, and surviving. Yet they arrived at the end without understanding why any of it had been necessary. The gods had given mortals life, freedom, and curiosity, but they had not given them a clear purpose. They had created existence without explaining what that existence was meant to become. Shoshan bore the weight of every question. She also began to notice that not all souls were treated equally. Faithful expected their gods to receive them. Warriors caught upon the powers they had honored, priests died surrounded by prayers and sacred rites, and kings were buried beneath monuments while generations preserved their names. But others had nothing. There were mortals who had never known a temple. There were those who had been abandoned by their families, cast from their communities, or forgotten by the societies around them. Some had never chosen a god because no priest had ever cared enough to teach them. Others had lived in places where survival demanded every moment of their attention, leaving little time for worship or contemplation. They were not evil, and they were not cruel. They had not rejected the gods out of hatred or defiance. Many simply had never been seen. When such souls reached the end of their lives, they found that death offered them no greater comfort than life had. The gods looked first toward those who had prayed to them, served them, or carried their symbols. Those who belonged nowhere were passed over, and Shoshan could not accept this. She had been given responsibility for guiding the dead, and therefore she had heard their fears that the other gods did not hear. She had seen the forgotten arrive alone. She had learned their names when no one else remembered them. And at first she merely remained with them longer than her duty required. She listened to their stories, comforted those who believed their lives had been meaningless, and she assured them that being forgotten by mortals did not make them unworthy of compassion. But there were always more. Each passing generation brought new souls who had been ignored, rejected, or left behind. And Shoshan began spending less time within the halls of the Pantheon and more time among those who had no place elsewhere. The other gods became concerned. They believed she was neglecting the order established for her. Souls were no longer being shepherded according to the design Egomar had intended. The processes of death slowed and became uncertain, and spirits lingered because Shoshan would not hurry them onward before their fears had been heard. The gods told her to return to her appointed place, and Shoshan refused. She argued that the role itself was flawed. It was not enough to carry souls away from life. Someone had to care where they were taken. Someone had to consider the fate of those who had followed no god and belonged to no divine domain. Death could not merely be an ending. It needed meaning, judgment, compassion, and purpose. Egomar saw defiance where Shoshan saw necessity. He had created the world and ordered the Pantheon. He believed that if each deity abandoned their appointed responsibility, whenever they questioned his design, the balance of creation would collapse. Shoshan's refusal threatened more than her own office. It challenged the authority upon which the divine order had been built. But Shoshan would not yield. She chose the lost over her standing among the gods. She abandoned her post as the shepherd appointed to all souls and instead became the patron of those whom no one else would claim. And Egomar cast her from the Pantheon. Her name was removed from sacred records, her shrines abandoned or destroyed. Priests who continued to honor her were condemned. Stories that had once named her as one of the earliest gods were rewritten until she became a warning against disobedience. As the generations passed, fewer mortals remembered the truth. Those who followed the Pantheon began calling her a traitor. Later accounts described her as corrupt, dangerous, and opposed to the natural order. And eventually many ceased to regard her as a fallen god and named her among the devils. But Shoshan found no home among them either. They had no love for the mortals she protected. Their design sought domination, corruption, or the removal of mortal life from the world entirely. Shoshan did not share their hatred. She had sacrificed her place among the gods because she believed mortal souls deserved greater compassion, not less. The devils distrusted her because she had once stood with Egomar, and the gods rejected her because she had challenged him. She belonged to neither, and so she went into hiding. She did not cease her work. She continued to find those who had been forgotten. She came to the dying who believed no power would hear them. She gathered the souls of those who had been abandoned by their families, their nations, and their faiths. Some mortals feared her arrival because they had been taught that she was a devil. Others welcomed her as the first presence to offer kindness when every temple had turned them away. To some, she became a dark figure, whispered about in graveyards and forgotten places, but to others, she was a hidden savior, the final refuge of those who had nowhere else to turn. Shoshan accepted every name given to her because names mattered less than the souls who needed her. And the gods continued without her, but the vacancy she left behind could not be ignored forever. Without a true shepherd of death, souls lingered. Some remained bound to places of violence or grief, and others were drawn towards powers that promised them purpose. The faithful might find their way toward the gods they had served, but the uncertain, the unclaimed, and the corrupted wandered without guidance. This is when Malachar died. Few deaths in the history of Tehran carried greater consequence, as Malachar had torn the land apart and created horrors, enslaved minds, and cursed entire peoples. His body was destroyed, but his spirit remained. There was no God prepared to judge him. There was no shepherd capable of guiding so powerful and corrupted a soul away from the mortal world. Shoshan had abandoned that responsibility centuries before, and none of the other gods had understood the importance of replacing her. So Malachar remained. His spirit endured beyond his death, clinging to the world and searching for vessels, relics, and followers through which he might one day return. And only then did the Pantheon begin to understand the true cost of Shoshan's exile. They had believed death required only an ending. Shoshan had tried to teach them that death required direction. It required someone to guide the righteous, the wicked, the faithful, the faithless, the remembered and the forgotten alike. Yet even after Malachar's spirit remained, Egomar did not call Shoshan home. The wound between them had grown too deep. Shoshan no longer trusted the Pantheon to value those it had once ignored, and the gods remained unwilling to admit openly that the one they had condemned had understood something they did not. Instead, Egomar searched the mortal world for another. He did not search for the strongest warrior or the most devoted priest. He searched for someone who understood that every soul possessed value, even after life had left it. He searched for someone who could face death without cruelty and provide purpose without demanding worship. Shoshan remained outside the Pantheon, hidden from the gods, rejected by the devils, and remembered only by those desperate enough to seek her. And she would continue as the patron of lost souls, until a threat from beyond the world forced the gods to speak her name once more. And Egomar continued his search, and it would lead him into the frozen gray wastes, where the Stormclaw clan continued its endless war against the horrors left by Malachar. And it is there that he would find a cleric, and her ascension would restore the office Shoshan had abandoned, but it would not completely erase Shoshan's legacy.